So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the development of American money. Now, despite the fact that I am an actual historian and an actual American, American history has never really been my area. I've been more interested in Europe, and I'm more interested in the times before America was a country. But today I get to cheat a little bit on this topic because I can say that this Spanish coin is actually American money. I do want to start my talk in Europe, in the 18th century. Money developed kind of haphazardly in Europe. Every country was making its own currency and developing its own denominations, and so it was kind of a mess. But there were coins that started being recognized by multiple countries as being trade money. And the big one was the Maria Theresa thaler. She was Empress of Austria, and this coin was being widely used throughout Europe. And when she died in 1780, Austria continued to put these coins out. They continued to have Maria Theresa on them, and they continued to be dated 1780. And when Austria stopped putting these coins out, other countries started putting them out, still with Maria Theresa on them, and still dated 1780. And in fact, it's still happening today. So if you get the opportunity to buy a Maria Theresa thaler, don't expect that it's actually from 1780. Now, one of the things that happened in Europe was that as money was developing, with countries that had similar languages, they sometimes had similar names for their money. And so as Austria had the thaler, the Dutch had a Daalder. And the Dutch didn't have a lot of colonies, but they did have a trade empire, that they were the people who went from colony to colony moving goods. And so the Daalder was well known in the Americas. But the coin that was in most circulation in the Americas was a Spanish coin, and that Spanish coin became known as a Spanish dollar, which is borrowed from Daalder. It's not the official name for it, however. Officially, this piece is a 8 reales piece, reales being the unit of currency for the Spanish at the time. And because of that value, the 8 reales piece, it has also been known as a piece of 8. You've probably heard of pieces of 8 from pirate movies, and you may have heard the story about how they would cut these into pieces and be able to use that as making change, of which you totally could. But when we say piece of 8, we're not talking about the pieces of the coin, we are talking about the coin itself. The little pieces were called bits. So a piece of 8 is the coin, a bit is a piece of 8. So why was there so much Spanish money in the Americas? Because most of the Americas actually belonged to the Spanish. They had all of South America other than Brazil. The Portuguese had Brazil. They had all of Central America. They had Mexico. They also had Florida, the Californias, and most of the middle of what is now the United States. It was huge. And they had lots of silver mines. That was one of their big interests in the Americas. And so they were putting out tons of silver coinage. Meanwhile, the British colonies really didn't have a lot of money. The British were not sending over a lot of their money, and eventually they stopped sending silver over entirely because the point of a colony is to make money for the home country. It sucks to be a colony. And so the idea of sending a precious metal to the colonies didn't make a lot of sense. They wanted money coming from the colonies to Britain. There was also a huge trade deficit that the colonists were buying way more things from Britain than Britain was buying for them. And so money was really, really scarce. So they used Spanish money, which was being accepted everywhere. So unlike Europe, where they had to develop their money sort of on the fly and organically, the United States got to plan out their money. And they decided they weren't going to use the British system. The British system had 12 pennies to a shilling, 20 shillings to a pound, and then a bunch of denominations in between those. And we decided that we were going to have the dollar, the word we borrowed from the Spanish, and we were going to divide that dollar into 100 pieces, and we called those pieces cents, from a Latin word that means 100. Similarly, the Spanish-speaking countries in the Americas also adopted the Spanish dollar, which became known as the peso, and they broke their pesos down into 100 pieces and called those centavos. So now you're probably thinking that I am a bit of a smart aleck in describing that coin as being American money. Oh, you mean North American money or South American money? No, I mean that it was legal tender in the United States until 1857. We didn't make it, of course. It's still Spanish money, but we accepted it as legal tender. You could go to a merchant and trade it in for goods. It was considered money in the United States. And the reason is that we weren't making a lot of money for a long time. We didn't even start making coins until 1792. And meanwhile, there's all of this Spanish money that's already in circulation, so we just continued using it. We can even thank Spanish money for the dollar sign, because when you're writing out pesos, it was frequently abbreviated to PS. And over time, those letters tended to overlap each other until it turned into a dollar sign. And today, not only do countries like America and Canada, which also uses the dollar sign, but countries that use the peso also use the dollar sign. Now, I did consider finishing this without actually showing you money that was minted by the United States, but I realized that I may not have emphasized one point enough, and so I want to return to the issue of these coins being equivalent to one another. Because when I talked about Thalers and Daalders and dollars, it's not just that these coins are sharing a name, they're sharing a value. So this is the Maria Theresa Thaler, and this is our Spanish dollar, a piece of 8. And this is an American peace dollar. Now, the Maria Theresa coin is a little larger because the silver is not quite as fine, but the other two coins weigh exactly the same, and they're worth exactly the same, or at least they did up until 1857. And as another note, we are talking about bits, that 1/8 of a piece of 8. It's kind of archaic now, but for a while Americans did talk about things being priced in bits. And if you've ever heard the phrase something being 2-bit, meaning that it's cheap and worthless, that's what it's referring to, because as 1 bit is 1/8 of a dollar, 2 bits is a quarter. Hope you enjoyed.